to just say good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to thank you, and welcome to the inaugural presentation for the College of Education's Diversity Lecture Series. I'm Elaine Clark. I'm the Dean of the College, and I'm the daughter of Southerners who own restaurants in Detroit. And never to my memory was there ever a situation where there was segregation at my parents' counters. So I want to thank you, Joan. I didn't even think about actually why that was and why my upbringing was different. But I'm very thankful and appreciative of you and everyone who helped and to make life different for so many of us. It's such an honor for us today to have Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, a widely recognized civil rights activist, and her son, Loki Mulholland, a filmmaker whose documentaries explore the history of racism and highlight the need to disrupt and disarm the onslaught of micro and macroaggressions that has so negatively affected so many people's lives. Joan and Loki have dedicated their lives to bringing attention to the problem of prejudice and discrimination toward individuals of color, and have helped empower others, including children, to show respect and to help make this world truly a better place. It was Dr. Martin Luther King who said, "We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people." Joan and Loki are clearly the good people, and they refuse to be silent and have continued this throughout their lives, and we thank them. So it's most fitting, I think, that they are the inaugural speakers for this diversity series that we're planning to continue on for years and way beyond me, and because they truly know how to speak up and speak out. And so I want to turn over the mic now to Dr. Alex Hires, who has the privilege of introducing these two special speakers.
Welcome and thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Alex Hires, and I'm an assistant professor in the history of U.S. education in the Department of Education, Culture, and Society. This spring, the ECS department is hosting a diversity lecture series. Collectively, these lectures by urban historian Dr. Max Felker-Cantor, civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump, and historian of education James D. Anderson will examine the history of racism, resistance, and education in the United States. For our first lecture, we have invited Joan Trumpauer Mulholland and her son, Loki Mulholland, to discuss white privilege and institutional racism in the United States. It is an honor to introduce civil rights activist and freedom fighter, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland. The first time I encountered her was in the pages of Anne Moody's Coming of Age in Mississippi. As an instructor at the University of Virginia, I assigned Moody's memoir so students could understand the trials, tribulations, and experiences of the movement's foot soldiers. Of Joan Trumpauer, Moody writes, quote, "During the summer, a white student moved into the room across the hall from me at Tougaloo College. Her name was Joan Trumpauer, and she told me she worked for SNCC as a secretary. In a short time, we got to know each other very well, and soon I was going into Jackson, Mississippi with Joan and hanging out with her at her office." Joan Trumpauer Mulholland's work with SNCC as a secretary was merely one role she played during the civil rights movement. By the time she was 23 years old, Ms. Mulholland had participated in over 50 sit-ins and demonstrations during the Freedom Rides, the Jackson World War sit-ins, the March on Washington, the Meredith March, and the Selma to Montgomery March as well. For her actions, she was disowned by her family, attacked, shot at, put on death row, and hunted down by the Ku Klux Klan for execution. Her path has crossed with some of the biggest names in the civil rights movement, including Martin Luther King Jr., Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, John Lewis, Diane Nash, and Julian Bach. She has received numerous awards in recognition for her work in the civil rights movement. Joan is a recipient of the 2015 National Civil Rights Museum Freedom Award, the 2019 International Civil Rights Museum Trailblazer Award, the 2018 I Am a Man Award, the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated Annual Award of Honor, and the Anti-Defamation League annual Heroes Against Hate Award. Sharing the stage tonight. And sharing the stage tonight with Joan is her son, Loki Mulholland. Loki Mulholland is an award-winning filmmaker, author, and activist. He speaks across the country on issues of race and social justice. He is an Emmy-winning producer of The Uncomfortable Truth, which many of you in this room had the privilege of seeing during the lunch hour. And for his film work, Mulholland has received 40 Telly Awards and 12 Best Documentary Awards. And his first book, She Stood for Freedom, was nominated for the 2017 Amelia Bloomer Award. He is also the founder and executive director of the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation, which was created to end racism through education. Please join me in welcoming Joan Trumpauer Mulholland and Loki Mulholland up here to share the uncomfortable truth.
Made me sound good. That's great. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm Joan's son. My mom's going to come up a little later, but this is, we're laughing about that. That's who I am, right? I was actually with at Meg Evers' home where he was shot with his daughter, Rena Evers, and who was that? Edelman. Wait, Edelman. Yeah, so we're all there, and people are coming through, and Rena's on my right, my mom's on my left, and I'm like, oh, Rena, how you doing? And they come to me and go, who are you? I'm like, I'm Joan's son. He's like, oh, Joan, how you doing? I'm like, oh. Rena leans over and goes, don't worry, Loki, I don't have a name either. I'm just Megger's daughter. So, just who we are. That's all right. So I'm gonna do this part of the presentation, then bring my mom up in a little bit. But I'm gonna be honest with you. I've done this presentation before, last year. I keep adding stuff to it. And professors know this, you never know what's going to happen, right? So it's going to be fun for me. Really entertaining for you guys. How many of you already seen The Uncomfortable Truth? Okay, handful of you. Good. All right. Rest of you, oh man, you're going to have some fun. So we're going to talk about this. Let's talk about it, right? I created this scale last night. What does racism look like, right? Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry, this is the next slide, right? See, I'm already off. So what does racism look like? To most white people, this is what it looks like. It's locked in time, in black and white photographs. Right? We can pinpoint that and go, this is segregation. This is easy. I can see this, right? And we had the Civil Rights Act in '64, and Obama's president. So hey, hallelujah, we're here, right? Unfortunately, the disconnect is that this is how everyone else sees racism, the institutions. And that's what we're going to talk about. How do we get across that? Right? So, Dr. King, we all love hearing Dr. King say nice things until he says something we don't like. So whites must frankly be said are not putting in the right effort to re-educate themselves, to get over their racial ignorance, right? This is what this is about. Hopefully, and if people, when they have questions from Q&A, I want to preface this. When we have Q&A, I've been in situations where people have asked questions and part of the audience just boos them down. It's like, hold on, wait a second. We're here to learn. And if someone's brave enough to ask a question, let them ask so they can learn. That's what this is about. All right, so racial awareness scale. This is what I created last night. So most of us would love to be on this side of the scale, woke, right, as a word, right? It's like, all right, yeah, I feel like I'm woke, right? This is great. And the other side of the scale is, what the hell is wrong with you? And then in the middle is, I have a black friend. Right? So, I am not this part of the scale. I'm definitely not this part of the scale. I think I'm a little bit, somewhere in between. I like to at least see myself that. Most people, bless their hearts, I'm from the South now, they fit in here, right? And what I say to people, and when I say people, I'm talking to the white ones here. It's good to have a black friend. It's great. Do they know that? How good of a friend are you? when they say something happens, do you believe it? And do they know that you believe it? Because that's what friends do. So, it can't be the token thing that, hopefully is your free pass, right? And so, I get a lot of things said to me and written to me and so forth. And these are some of the, I don't know why people say the stupidest things to me, but this is what people say. And I think you use the term racism too much. Maybe sometimes it's just people saying racially insensitive things, which is what? Race, right, exactly, yeah. What's that term for people who are openly racist, but say things that are, yeah, exactly, yeah. These are literally said, I love this one. Was slavery really racist because the word didn't exist back then? I was like, this was a grown man. I was like, wow. What do you think? Well, yeah. I'm like, why are you asking this question? You already know, right? And technically that is correct. The word racism didn't exist at a certain point in time, but we know what it is. And I was giving a presentation, and before I went on stage, they said, hey, if you're going to talk about racism, like, do you even know why I'm here? I said, can you present it in a fun and inviting way? So I said, oh yeah, sure. So I went back to my computer before I went live and put that in there in the presentation. With all the other stuff. Like, hey, by the way, yeah, I was like, wow. So does racism still exist? Right? The answer is yes, of course. Because we already know that. Look at that, there it is. So why can't black people just move on? I'll use the same picture. Because white people can't move on, right? The fact is, not everything is racist. And the fact is, those things that are racist, right? So call it what it is. The downwinder effect, this is how I like to explain it to high schoolers who, when they're paying attention. Who's familiar with what the downwinders are? Okay. Yeah? Okay. So, downwinders, for those who don't know, so right here in Nevada, they're blowing up bombs and stuff like that. We used to actually do this. We used to blow up bombs above the atmosphere, and on the ground and stuff like that, over in Nevada. And this was the radiation zone that went through all, this is nuts. So, this is what it looked like, right? Blow it up, looks really cool. I think that's pretty cool. And invite people out, sit down, have picnics and things like that, give them little badges, right? Radiation badges. And this is how trusted people were. Like, is this dangerous? No, it's just science. Like, oh, okay, well, the government said it's okay, so it must be all right. But my in-laws live right there. A little town called Blanding. And this is what it looks like when you're, in Blanding, and Blanding's a dump. That looks even better when you're driving out. Anyone here from Blanding, by the way? Okay, no. Okay, I should have asked that first. But it's quaint, it's nice, all right? But here's what it looks like, though. So the test ban treaty took place in 1963. But the impact of all the those detonating those bombs and everything continued. My father-in-law, I haven't thought about this. He passed away last year. He was a downwinder. He had cancer. Right. His wife also has cancer. Fortunately, she's been able to survive that with treatment and so forth. But that cancer didn't surface until now. All these years later. Because we're all downstream of the past. Well, guess what? Racism looks the same way. Right? The impact continues. So starting from 1619, when slavery ends, in 1865, it wasn't like suddenly racism ended, right? It wasn't like, oh, well, we had a good run, oh, well, guess we're all equal now. That's not how it worked, right? Everyone's either double down, try, it's called 13th Amendment, right? Slavery still exists, right?
Well, all you got to do is read the
Utah Constitution, yeah, there we go. 1965, was the Voting Rights Act. 64 was, the Civil Rights Act. So 65, hey, segregation ended. What happened? It continues, right? And we don't know what we don't know. We would love for people to think, to assume, and I see this frustration all the time, like, how come people don't know this? Give me a break. I mean, this is 2019, right? And I made this comment. It was, well, technically, we all can build a nuclear reactor based on what's on the internet. The instructions are there. We should all be master carpenters by now. We should all be master electricians and plumbers and everything else. The information's there. But if you're not looking for it, if it's not in your wheelhouse, if you're not thinking about it, you just don't know what you don't know. And quite frankly, you're not ignorant. Your education is deprived. Because the system is set up to teach you something entirely different. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. Hopefully no one's surprised by this. But America was founded for white people. Why white people? Does that shock anybody? Okay, good.
Well, the foundation of our country. Well, first of all, we had to wipe out all the red people. I mean, we have a very violent history. And the solution has always been, we will kill as many people as we have to establish the place for white people to be. If you look at the foundation of the country, if you look at what it became, if you look at the economic system it built, the social systems it set up, it was all about somebody's got to be on the bottom, and here's a convenient bunch of people to do it.
This social order would be codified by a constitution that allowed slavery to continue in this new land of liberty, and declare enslaved blacks as only 3/5 of a person. White supremacy was now the official policy of the United States of America. And this mentality would become truly ingrained in our nation's psyche. From 1789 to 1850, 80% of our presidents owned slaves, 80 while serving as president. 18 of the first 31 Supreme Court justices also owned people, and the interests they looked out for and the policies they ruled on would have a lasting impact.
So I want to show you something here as well. So since our first Continental Congress in 1774 until today, over 12,000 people have served in Congress. And over that 240 plus year period, only 3% have been women or people of color. And of that 3%, a third are serving right now. So the other 97% have been white men. Because remember, women, at least white women, couldn't vote until 1920, and African Americans, all African Americans, couldn't vote until 1965. Now there was this short period of time during Reconstruction when black men could actually vote and even hold office. As a matter of fact, the first one to do so was Hiram Rhodes Revel of Mississippi. He was a U.S. Senator in 1870. That's shocking to a lot of people I know because it only took Mississippi 148 years to get around to ratifying the 13th Amendment in 2013. That's the one that freed the slaves, by the way. 2013. In 2016, Mississippi, Jackson, state of Mississippi, declared April to be Confederate Heritage Month. All right. So Jackson, Mississippi, not to be outdone, countered them with Islamic Heritage Month, just to keep things equal. It's pretty funny, actually. Assalamu alaikum. Yes. But this is what history looks like. Red's bad, green's good. Right? You've got a few good things, and depends on your politics, of course. But it's not a pretty picture. That's reality. It is what it is, right? And talk a little more about that.
There are a lot of things that are set up to make sure that people fail. Now, people are, well, there's nobody sat down and thought this out. Well, you're wrong. Because the influences of policy were the same people like Mitch McConnell and those people who come from a thing that says, blacks, we don't want them to get too far. So they don't have to think about it. That's just how they're going to function. And it's not just the folks from the South. I mean, Pennsylvania. Now, sometimes I'd rather be in Alabama than Pennsylvania. Let's stop kidding ourselves. So even though people didn't sit down and say it, sitting in the room was a philosophy that says we have to take care of our own. And that does not include black people. So you didn't have to sit there and say, there doesn't have to be a grand conspiracy against black people. It's already built in. It's already built in.
So, this is one of Nixon's cabinet members. And he's talking about the war on drugs. Nixon actually learned a little bit something from George Wallace and created what was called the Southern Strategy, which Reagan used really well, and Trump as well, which was basically just instill fear in everybody in the South and gather up all those votes. But what's really, really telling is that this was actually a very thought out thing. You can arrest the leaders and break their homes and everything else. We knew we were lying. We knew it. Who cares about the truth as long as you can get the votes? And that was just at the expense of African Americans. And I actually had to take some notes. And this is not just about drugs. Plug my phone in right there. I couldn't get this thing to switch over for my notes. I had to take pictures of my notes here real quick. So this is how intelligent I am. But, got to focus. Okay, that's my license plate. Okay. So this traffic stop. So this is at a 1 week period. 1,000 cars went through this one section in Florida. Right? And of those 1,000 cars, 5% were white. Not the cars, the people who were driving. Right. Okay, so only 5% of the drivers were white. 80% of those stopped were African American or Hispanic. Right. And that you sit there and go left to south, and this was probably North Florida, of course, right? That's a really racist place. But this is the New Jersey Turnpike, and in the New Jersey Turnpike, 80% of the people who drive on the New Jersey Turnpike are white. It's surprising. However, yet despite that fact, let me zoom in on my notes here. 42% of those who were stopped were African American. Now, whites and blacks commit crimes exactly, at the same rate, roughly the same rate. Surprisingly, for traffic stops and so forth, traffic violations, whites and blacks break the law at exactly the same rate, apparently, according to statistics. So, 42% were African American. However, of the arrests, 75% of all those who were arrested ended up being African American. So, it's a systemic concept that goes through this. So,
you'd almost think there is no white crime. Yet there's more white people in jail than there are black people. But you would think, they don't talk about it. And then they'll say stupid stuff, and they do talk about black. Well, most of the black crime is against black people. Well, most of the white crime is against white people. Why do we have that discussion? Well, because what they're really saying is we're afraid that the black people are going to do something to white people. So they don't even understand that in the same breath they're contradicting themselves. If it's against black people, see, when they say it's against black people, they're justifying police behavior in the black community. That's the only reason they ever make that statement. It's not that they're saying we're concerned about it. They're saying that's why the police do what they do. We don't understand why black people complain about the police, because most crime on black people is against black people. So we need to be there, and they should appreciate that, no matter what we do. There's no reason to talk about white crime on white people, because that's not what they're afraid of. They're afraid of the black people doing something to white people. So it's like there's no conversation going on. It's just a bunch of statements that make no sense. And yes, black people steal, black people kill, black people do drugs, but so do white people. And you try to have a conversation about white crime. I've tried. As soon as they make that statement about black crime and black people, I said, well, I'd rather talk about white crime on white people. Because I don't trust any of you people because you steal my money. Wall Street was about white people, not black people. Yet you trust them, you keep giving them your money. I said, so if you get mugged by a black guy, how come all black people got to pay for that? You suffer a lot more when they take your savings and you don't have any money to feed your children than you do if you get hit on the head and your watch gets stolen.
Yeah, we can't know better. Can't become better until we know better. And that comes with the rewriting of history. Right. Now, I get said this a lot, particularly because of the film Uncle Truth. Well, you're rewriting history. I'm like, you're all right. I'm writing it back to what it should have been. Quick pop quiz. Why was the Civil War fought? What was the reason over that? And Jeff,
To unify the states.
state unification, okay? What's that?
Labor.
Labor is, there's another word for labor?
Free labor.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Well, it's economics.
Okay, we have economics, slavery, anybody else? Want to go on?
Because slavery brought in so much money in the South.
Right, yeah. I actually asked this question to a bunch of teachers in East Texas, which is, probably biased in and of itself. That shake right there, like, oh yeah, East Texas. In economics, state rights, and all these things, and slavery was the main answer that was given. It was like this big word bubble they could text in and you could see all this. But there's only one answer. And that is, what's that? Everybody now?
Slavery.
Yes, we shouldn't be afraid to say that. That's why. Everything else might be an appendage to that, but slavery is the reason. And we have proof of that, by the way. Alexander Stephens, vice president of the CSA, this is his famous cornerstone speech, and the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination, superior race, it's its natural, normal condition. This is why we're doing it. Matter of fact, it's written in their Constitution. There's at least 5 spots right there in this one section, article, get technical there. Even after the war, it's like, hey, well, why do we go to war? Protect our property. What was their property? Right. It's pretty darn obvious. So why do we keep saying state rights? Why do we keep saying economics? Why do we keep saying these things? President Johnson. So this is after Lincoln gets killed. President Johnson says the country is for white men, and by God, as long as I'm president, there shall be a government for white men. Right? It's the president of the United States. Right, so, this example here is really interesting to me. You guys are 40 acres and a mule. You're familiar with that? That's special field order number 15. Although I don't think there was any mules. Right? I think it was just the 40 acres. President Johnson, when he was a congressman, had petitioned for years for Homestead Act. Let's give poor whites land for free. No barriers or anything, right? So finally became president and stuff. He finally got this whole thing through, 270 million acres when it was all said and done. It didn't end until 1988. It was the last land grant, which was in Alaska. When he became president, this was in February when it started, and it was revoked, the special field order, and it was revoked later that year, I think in October. All right? So, there we go. All right. Black codes, right? The war is over. So this is freedom, what do you call slavery? So this plays into the 13th Amendment, right? We gotta, how can we re-enslave people without calling it slavery? It's that foundation of racism that builds new structures on top. Slavery, Jim Crow, colorblind society. It's the same material, but we have to take care of that foundation. That's the problem. But basically what ends up happening is that you have to have a job. If you're not, that's vagrancy, you're loitering and so forth, and the white person has to give you that job, by the way, has to sign off on this. If you don't have that, we're going to throw you into prison. Right? Then what they're going to do is they're going to sell you back to the plantations to work. Right? Which sounds like what? Slavery. That's exactly what it was. Just a legal way of doing it. Time and time again. Compulsory ignorance. So, part of the problem, and this plays into voting rights in particular, was these freed people obviously weren't afforded an education to begin with when they were slaves. So now suddenly you have 4 million freed enslaved people and only 3% can read. Right? And here you can see in Louisiana in these time periods how much money was afforded to African Americans for education, how much for whites. 50% of the population in these states of African Americans had no more than 5 years of education, right? So now we're going to have a literacy test. You have to read the read a part of the Constitution. The problem with the literacy test when that happening was, this is a way to obviously restrict voting for African Americans, was as well, gosh, a lot of these poor whites couldn't read either. So we got to change that. So what they ended up doing was, like the bar soap test, the Ivory soap test. How many bubbles are in a bar of soap? Do you know? Okay, well, you can't know. Well, take a guess. 0? Okay, well, you pass. I'll let you have that. How many do you think is in a bar of soap? Yeah, I don't know why you're even asking this question. Because you ain't going to pass no matter what. Right, okay, this so we're clear. All right. You guys remember the United Confederacy? Okay, so these are the ones that actually created all these statutes. So this is the group that rewrote the history. They felt there needed to be a fair telling of the history of the United States, particularly of the South. This is what they're all about: collect and preserve the material, and be truthful history of the war between the states. That just sounds beautiful. War of Yankee aggression, I think is what my grandmother used to say. And this was one of the first books they came out with. And actually, this is like the front of the page. It's like, hey, this is what we're all about here with this series of 3 histories. No Southern child need to remain in ignorance of their origin, growth, and the progress of the United States, or to be taught the history of one side of the Wow. Now, this is what's inside it. The evils connected with slavery were less than those of any other system of labor. Because, hey, we Christianized a bunch of savages. I mean, this is the language being used to teach children. And the Klan, where they were necessary, for those misguided Negroes, and they couldn't even capitalize that, of course. But this book here was used in Virginia until the 1970s. Believe it or not. There were always present at family weddings. What were they probably doing? Right, serving, of course. They were allowed to look on the dances and entertainment and regard that master and slave had for each other, made plantation life happy and prosperous. I mean, this is the happy slave syndrome, right? This narrative. The Negroes went about their cheerful manner, making a living for themselves. A living, oh my gosh. And they paid little attention to these arguments about North and South, right? They didn't have the capacity to do that. Was the argument, right? And of course, they weren't going to bother themselves with that. Now we go. That was 40 plus years ago, which dates me. Here's a textbook from about 2 years ago, and it was this curious language that slave labor was actually immigrant labor. Ben Carson actually reinforced that. Hey, they were other immigrants who came here on the bottom of the slave ship. All right. And then, of course, the internet came to the rescue. Hey, Ben, by the way, here's the difference between a slave and an immigrant, in case you're wondering. This textbook was used in Arizona. It still exists. You can go buy it on Amazon. They still sell this. But this is their description, one of the descriptions used about slavery. This is right now used in textbooks. Black children ran naked. It was generally from choice. And when the white boys saw that, they were jealous. So this is what people constantly get fed with, drip by drip. And it creates this very warped perspective on what reality really is. I did this, I was speaking in Indiana at this university. I actually had this class I was talking with, and we had these giant whiteboards, and I just started writing. I said, hey, name some famous people in history. Right? George Washington. I'm like, oh yeah, all right, George Washington, boom, boom, boom. Right? He said, Beyonce. I'm like, oh, Beyonce, okay, there we go. And they just kept on naming people. I was like, wow, all right. This is what it came up with. When we added it all up, their perspective of history was 70% white men. Now, population-wise, just thinking men, male and female, what should that be? 50-50. It's always been that way. Adam and Eve. It's always been 50-50. Whites, by the way, for those who are wondering, are a minority in the world. Okay? Because it creates this very warped perspective. Clearly, a sense of superiority. Because if all we ever talk about is white people, and you're a white person in particular, what else are you going to think about yourself? You feel pretty good. What happens, though, is that people of color in those classrooms, how are they seen by their white peers? Less than. Click. And it's all about the narrative. So this here was an interesting story that was told. These mug shots here. This is in Iowa, which is where my grandfather's from. I'm ashamed to say it's Iowa. I'm sorry, Mom, but this was Iowa. What's different about these mug shots? Yes?
White boys are dressed up in crack suits, while the black guys are in t-shirts with 90.
Yeah. So, do you really think these are actually mug shots? No, of course not. They're high school photos. These are mug shots. Of course, always taking it to someone's worst. And these three guys, that's their high school photos. Now, what crimes do you think they committed? The same crime. The same reporter wrote on both crimes. But the person who chose the photographs decided we should put these in instead of these. Because what else would they think about African Americans? Right? That's not mine. Okay, I have it. Not my battery. All right. This is what it looks like. Thugs, animals, destroying things. When white people protest or riot, right? It's rowdy, it's mischief, they're just having fun, come on, like, hey, we just won a football game. Let's burn everything, right? At least, oh my gosh, at least this was a purpose. This is Ferguson, right? I mean, a football game, give me a break. And actually, I think this was actually what was called Pumpkin Fest in New Hampshire. Again, I think they ran out of pumpkins and like people lost their minds.
You almost think there is no white crime. Yet there's more white people in jail than there are black people. But you would think, they don't talk about it.
Okay, that's right, I had that in there. So, our country does have a national problem, a crime problem. It's a nice little mugshot there. These stats are not about black people. Which is really interesting when you think about the particular one about, the gang-related stuff. Right? It's like, wow, I mean, they committed the majority of the gang-related murders of which the victims were white. That was actually white gang members. That blew my mind. But all these things add up. But the narrative would tell you otherwise. If I didn't put that photo in there, and then load everything in advance, you would think differently. Matter of fact, many African Americans would think differently. Because we're all fed the same diet. Incarceration rates in this country, if you took 100,000 white males, 478 would be in state or federal prison. If you took the same number of African Americans, that number increases to 3,023. But yet, remember, whites and black commit crimes at the same rate. So what's going on? It's that warped perspective, it's that narrative that's constantly been built, right? And we continue to see that, obviously, until this day. Drug arrests, Hispanics and African Americans, 75% of the drug arrests, and yet whites and blacks use drugs at roughly the same rate. Where do you think white people get drugs from? They're not going to the hood.
Over the counter.
Over the counter? They're getting it from their peers. They're getting it from white people, right? Von Braun said, this is the catalyst for me when I made the Uncomfortable Truth was, he says, everyone knows where the drugs are, but you never see a SWAT team raiding university. You guys don't have drugs here, I know that. However, but you'll always find them in the hood. So why is that? That's what started my journey on the Uncomfortable Truth and to really think about all this. Now, I thought I was on that woke scale, right? You guys, some of you saw. I was, I wasn't I have a black friend scale, I think I was a little more that way. But I thought I actually knew something until I started really diving into it. I'm getting ready to wrap up here. So heritage, not hate. Right? This is my neighbor about 10 houses down. Got this flag flying around. Heritage, not hate. Who's ever heard that before? Right? Southern, I'm a Southerner. I am. I'm from Virginia. My family's from Georgia. Oh my gosh, I'm dying of war. Right?
Probably with your boy.
We don't want it. Thank you. My mom, folks. So, heritage, not hate. Yes, it's a heritage of hate. Right? I actually literally had this question asked me: do you think the Confederate flag is racist? Now, my typical response when people say stupid things to me is I have to actually stop and think, because I want to lash out. That's never going to get anyone anywhere. If you attack someone's ignorance, they're going to double down on stupid. Every time. So you need to be willing to have patience and walk people through this. This is what I did with this gentleman. It was a grown man. I was like, my gosh. In my mind, I'm going, what the hell is wrong with you? Right? Side scale. He fits that scale. But this is literally what happened. I said, well, what does the flag represent? He was like, well, I don't know. I was like, oh, okay. Wow. You were gosh stupid. On the inside, boys. I kept that on the inside. It's like, okay, well, hey. He asked me, I don't know. I said, well, it's the States, you know, and the war. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, of course. Maybe that was a trick question. I'll give him that. I said, okay, well, why did the States secede? He's like, state rights. I was like, okay. I knew that was going to happen. Yes, you know, if you guys can this type of question. I said, right, well, the right to do what? He says, own people. I said, well, slavery. He goes, yeah, well, slavery. I'm like, right. Is slavery racist? Well, yeah. So, okay, well, if slavery is racist, then the Confederate flag is racist. He came to that conclusion himself. I mean, it was a real mind blow for him. I was like, God, really? But I said, now understand something real quick here. Flying that flag on top of those state capitol buildings, that didn't happen right after the war. That took years. It was actually in response to Brown versus Board of Education. So that whole thing about this is our heritage, well, guess what heritage that is? Because that's what they were protesting, right? You can't take these flags down. My gosh, this is a monument to my family. Ooh. This is what was said in 1956. We will show that we intend to uphold what we stood for. We'll stand for it and we'll fight for it. And guess what that was? Segregation. So I said, well, hey, is segregation racist? He goes, well, yeah, of course. I said, okay, well, then the Confederate flag is racist. There we go. Right. And yet we see it pop up all over the place. Right. This is an interesting picture. The rebel barracks. Right, and here's this Confederate flag. There's a body hanging right here. This is the opposing school, which happens to be a different color uniform than this school. This was an elementary school. Proud to say they actually painted over it and changed things. But the response from people was, this is part of our heritage. How they were brought up. So I don't have a problem flying the rebel flag. Sometimes I think we just make it a bigger deal than it needs to be. Well, because it's important. That's why I make it, you know. Why do you keep talking about racism so much, Loki? Because I talk about important things and not about the Kardashians. Okay? That's why.
Sometimes you don't have to do anything, you just kind of ignore what's being done. Guy shows up with a gun with the president speaking, and you allow that to happen? Why? Why is that okay? So, you know, people talk to me a lot about how things are different, and things are. I'm not an alarmist that says nothing's different. But when you allow that to happen, that should be a message to people that says, somehow people still think that if there's a black person in ascendancy, like the president, that's not a good thing. That means these niggas that we thought we had under control are now in our White House. Take back the White House has nothing to do with a change in government. It's called, let's get this nigga out. That's what that's about. It has nothing to do with anything else. Why isn't the country up in arms that black folks are suddenly, they've been getting shot for a long time, by the way. But publicly, now we videotape this. Not every shooting is unjustified, don't get me wrong. But when people are filming that this is happening, why haven't we heard from all these folks saying, you know, this is wrong? If you think racism is done in America, and you see this happen, then you ought to be the first one on the line that says, wait a minute, it's not done. We made a mistake.
And we still receive racism today. But are we getting up on that line? You know, are we willing to get up and say something about it? Are we willing to take the risk to expose some of these uncomfortable truths? Right. I'm gonna pick on someone real quick here. In the back of the room, there's a gentleman who couldn't let it go. He saw what happened to Emmett Till. He said, he just couldn't let it go. He had to find out why. He had to research it and dig into it and spend years for it. This gentleman who lives here in Utah. That was Mississippi, 1955. And yet, a white Mormon guy, and I'm one of them, said, you know what, I got to talk about this. He wrote the definitive work, recognized throughout the country, throughout all the civil rights community. This is the Bible of Emmett Till. He's right here in this room, willing to take the risk to do what was right, even whether he did that. Do you mind standing just right here? This quote, "Till the killing of black men, black mothers' sons become as important to the rest of this country as the killing of white mothers' sons. We who believe in freedom cannot rest till this happens." When do you think this was said? If you already know the answer. All right, it said 1964. Right? The work continues. That was as relevant then as it is today. The civil rights movement is ongoing. When we talk with kids, it's interesting. We get kids, we say, "Hey, let's talk about civil rights. Name some civil rights people." And we get, "Oh, Rosa Parks, yeah, great. Dr. King, wonderful." We'll get Abraham Lincoln. "Oh, okay." I said, "Now, hold on, class, because everyone laughs. But wait a second. I didn't say modern civil rights movement. I just said civil rights movement. Do you think emancipating 4 million people was a civil rights act? You don't think so? You don't think that freeing people from slavery would not be a civil rights act? Okay, that's fair. It was good. I do. That's just me. Harriet Tubman, she gets civil rights activists. What did she do? There's definitely some political things going on with everything. I get that. I understand. Oh, believe me.
It's Lincoln's ideology that I have.
Oh, no, I understand. I understand that. Believe me. But I'm talking to elementary school kids.
Fair. Totally.
I'm not going to get into all the dynamics of what Abraham Lincoln actually really thought. But Harriet Tubman, right? The civil rights movement has always been going on. And it continues today. I want to introduce my mother. That's who you wrote on here, trust me. By the time she was 19 years old, she was involved in 3 dozen citizen protests when they took this pretty little photo of her and put her on death row. You might know her better from the back of her head. There's Ann Moody, coming of age Mississippi, and John Salter. This is the most integrated sit-in in the history of the movement. Because John Salter is not white, he's Native American.
Tribal men.
He passed in January. Okay. Take the time to ask questions, to really learn. This is the last survivor of that photo.
That
Truly,
photo.
my hero. Someone I love and admire greatly for her heroics, for her willingness to do what was right, even when it wasn't easy.
And just looking around this room is an example of how far we have come. This gathering would not have been possible, aside from maybe in a black church basement half a century ago. We've come a long way. We got a long way to go. I wouldn't think anything of going into, say, Starbucks. Maybe with my computer and sitting down waiting for my friend who's been delayed to get there, and maybe even wanting to use the restroom. Yeah. They had to close down Starbucks one day across the nation to have more sensitivity training after 2 guys were arrested. And God forbid, where was it? Seattle or somewhere out that way? No, I mean the guy who was calling his mother while black in the hotel lobby where he was a registered guest. You know, who knew that calling your mama while black was a crime? We jump to conclusions just by looking at somebody. I'm a little old quiet lady. I gotta be pretty good, right? Just ask my boy about that. Non-violent, except when he was naughty. Take off your belt, hand it to me, and bend over. Yeah. I'm not quite as sweet as I look. He'll tell you. But we still have, we've made a lot of progress. Let this move. When I was a kid in 5th grade in Arlington, Virginia, we stood at attention to sing Dixie. Now we also stood at attention to sing the national anthem. We didn't take a knee, we stood at attention. But I guess it was maybe 15 years ago before I retired, they were teaching Dixie as folk music in the school. I went and protested to our principal, a black lady, that I really didn't think that was appropriate as folk music or patriotic music in Arlington in the early 2000s. And in the teacher's lounge, I was hearing about how somebody had protested teaching the kids Dixie that way. They didn't know it was me. But we don't even know what we don't know and what we don't understand. It's amazing how far we still have to go. We did a lot of things back in the day to change the world. We did take a knee. Yeah, we took a knee. It was on the federal courthouse steps in Jackson, Mississippi. The post office was in the same building, it was a federal building, and there had been arrests at some churches. We were having a downtown civil rights thing, and I had actually checked with the Justice Department, this was about 64, in Washington, D.C. when I was up this way. I had called the Justice Department to see who had jurisdiction on the courthouse steps. If it's on the at the building, the federal marshals have jurisdiction. The local police can only make arrests if they are in hot pursuit and the person runs into the federal building. Well, we gathered in the post office and then got ourselves out onto the steps of the courthouse building and took a knee and prayed, and we were arrested and taken down to the basement of the city jail. That's the only time I've ever had a dog sicked in my direction. I still don't like German Shepherds up close too much. I'll pet them if it's your, and I have to be polite in your house. But I got a little prejudiced against some German Shepherds up close. Now, they didn't let the dogs get us, but they were letting them lunge mighty close to us. And, didn't go there. It's amazing the more we look at it, how much leftover racism, maybe it's not even leftover, maybe it's alive and well, racism, we still have in this country. If I hear you speaking Spanish, you might be 10th generation American. But if I hear you speaking Spanish and you got dark hair and sort of a slightly darker complexion than I do, I assume you're an immigrant. Maybe that's not unreasonable. But they were speaking Spanish. in the what is now the United States, long before they were speaking English. I mean, look at New Mexico, just, not too far from here. Land grants from the King of Spain. All those folks still speak Spanish down there at home. And they got their land grants tucked under the mattress. But, yeah, and people hear me with a southern accent sometimes. Oh, they get all sorts of negative stereotypes just for my accent. I'm being stereotyped too. But I can turn that southern accent on and off pretty well, just as a survival tool. When I got out of school in Mississippi and came up and got the job, good government job in Washington, D.C., people would hear my Mississippi accent. I could speak several dialects and things, and they'd just get their hackles up. And so I switched back to standard English. and a more neutral accent, But my sons, they could always tell, probably still could, who I'm talking to on the phone by the dialect I slip into. It isn't hard. Ain't hard, boy. No. In fact, there were times I acted as a translator in Mississippi back in the 60s. You had those New York lawyers, real good NAACP types, Bill Cooper, Arthur Kenoy, and they'd come down and be wanting to get information about voter discrimination and other issues from the black sharecropper types. I could understand them Yankees and sharecroppers. They could both understand me, but they couldn't understand each other. So I would just sort of repeat verbatim what one had said, and then the other one could understand. Now, there were a few times that I had to sort of change a word a little bit, reddish, I'm going to go reddish. That doesn't mean you're going to go get ready. It means you're going to go register to vote, reddish. And it's not, skin tone or anything. It's going to go see about votes, reddish. I knew what that meant. I could, say register for the Yankee. We have all sorts of strange divisions in this country. I remember the Laotian kids in Arlington, Virginia, had the highest percentage of Southeast Asian immigrants in the population of anywhere in the country. Not the highest number, but the highest percentage in the mid-70s. And ground zero in Northern Virginia was the school district where my boys were at. Well, Chinese New Year came around. La-di-da, all the Vietnamese kids, they were having tet, it was good. The Laotian kids had to make sure everybody understood this was not the Laotian New Year. The Vietnamese folks, they might be having New Year's, but we Lao folks, nah, it ain't our turn. And some of the white kids, my son's friends, they didn't like all these immigrants coming in. I reckon they got that from their parents. Well, my kids, and I think it's an effect of the civil rights movement on me, if they liked you, they liked you. If they didn't like you, they didn't like you. And if you were Laotian or black or Vietnamese or Hispanic, that was not a factor in who they liked. It was who you were as a person, your personality. Well, some of those white kids would hassle, even rough up the Southeast Asian kids when they were walking home from school. My kids were latchkey kids. I worked in a neighboring school district, another part of the county. And the rule was, when you get home from school, you don't let anybody in that house until mama gets home. You get busy doing your chores. Look at that list on the icebox. And you get your jobs done before I get home. Understand me, boy? The exception was if one of the Southeast Asian kids was being hassled, you could bring them in the house for safety until the way was clear. And I might even end up driving them to their home because you still didn't know who was lurking in the neighborhood. But Loki got roughed up a time or two walking Southeast Asians home. So I think he, you know, it was civil rights movement stuff. His older brother Jomo, he became good friends with this little kid Eric in kindergarten. They had matching shirts, hand-me-downs from the Sears and Roebuck's catalog. I knew where Jomo got his shirt, and Eric's shirt was exactly the same. And they became good friends. I respect the shirts had something to do with it. They had matching shirts. Eric was as black as you are. Jomo was white as I am, which back in the mid-70s, this was not common, shall we say, in kindergarten. And I asked Jomo, what attracted you to Eric? The shirts? He said, no, he just didn't have many friends. So I thought I'd be his friend. Didn't have anything to do with the shirt, didn't have anything to do with him being black. It just, the kid needed a friend on the playground. And I remember the doll babies in kindergarten. They were all these little white doll babies. That was when another brother was in kindergarten. Well, I thought that wasn't too good. So I sewed a lot. I got out all my scraps. I lined them up, picked out one from more or less each skin tone I could cover, and made rag dolls and clothes for them. You could trade back and forth. And yarn for hair. Man, we covered the universe with those rag dolls, and those plastic white doll babies went by the way. You can do lots of little things when you see the opportunity. The predispositions to see things a certain way are just sort of built into our culture. And we got to think beyond what we see every day and hear every day. And go for it. We still got a long way to go. And we can see the issues a lot broader than we used to, like in black and white. Well, the doll babies were in pinks and sort of yellowish tones and what have you. But we see the issues much more broadly. We see prejudice against people because of the language they speak at home, the food they eat, how they eat their food. I have a grandson whose mother's Japanese. Oh, he didn't want anything on the dinner table, right, except with forks and knives and things. And he was just being so fussy. I couldn't eat that food. I went and got some nice chopsticks out for him. He ate. Yeah. So grandma was okay. She knew about chopsticks. And there are just so many different issues. We see it more broadly. We see discrimination on language, on culture, on food, on gender identification. You just keep naming it. It's gone beyond north and south and black and white. I don't get too much prejudice from being a southerner anymore. Thank God. And we see it's not just access to public accommodations or voting. It's drawing school boundaries. It's where you put the off-ramp on the interstate. Whose neighborhood is that going to tear up? It's where are the grocery stores? Can everybody get easily to a grocery store? There are whole areas of Washington, D.C. without a single grocery store. So many different ways to consider things and look at it and the ramifications. And when they do build that off-ramp, who gets the contracts? Is it all white contractors? Who do they hire? Equal opportunity hiring? There are so many more issues than we saw back in the day. And we got to look at those and And there are some young folks, yes, a lot of old folks coming, picking up on things. Well, old folks, we got our role too, but you young folks, you got to figure out which issues you want to focus on and what strategies you want to use. I mean, to my mind, signing a petition on the internet is not action. It's saying, yeah, I agree to whoever sent you that petition, but it's not really taking it to the streets. It's not really speaking directly to your congressional office or your mayor's office. You got to take what we used to call direct action, which may not be picketing, it may be speaking publicly, but you got to do something. Now, old folks, and I see a few of us here, you have that nice silver, you know. For everybody on the front lines, somebody has to have their back. Both groups are essential. Somebody, if they're out there, has to be observing what is happening and ready to contact the press, contact the lawyer, contact the head office. I can't march anymore, the million-woman march. I can't march. Things so bad, I can't run. God knows, I've got bad knees. But I can make signs. There were big meetings in my area outside of Washington, D.C. in church basements to make signs for marchers to carry. Oh, I can make some good signs, yeah. Somebody's got to drive the cars to get people places and pick them up. Somebody's got to cook some food for them. Somebody's got to have a place for them to sleep off to their homes. I can do that stuff. We all can, all of us old gray-haired folks. We can't march anymore. And both groups are equally essential for the success of any movement. The people on the front lines and the people who have their backs. So, I'll stop with that happy thought. We all have a role to play, and if we have some questions, yes, ma'am?
Well, it's such a pleasure to have you here. I really appreciate the activist work that you have done, and thank you so much. I really appreciate your work. So, two questions. One, what were the, what were the social and cultural influences that on your life that gave you the desire to be an activist, particularly, being a Southerner in a Southern, segregated place?
Let me answer that.
Okay.
I went to Sunday school, memorized those Bible verses about love thy neighbor as thyself and do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. And faith without works is dead. So it's one thing to say, I believe it, but you got to get out there and do it. And I think that's basically what was behind it.
Thank you. The second question, just real quick. So, you were trained in nonviolent acts of resistance.
No,
No.
we talked about being nonviolent. I was before they got into the training.
Oh,
Except the Nashville crowd, they were all in the training business, but those of us in North Carolina and Virginia, we didn't have training. But we talked about it, you gotta be nonviolent. That means you don't spit back, you don't call nasty names back, et cetera, and if you don't have your nonviolence on today, we said, don't go down to the demonstration, stay back and be one of the folks having their back. Now, he can answer questions too.
So what made you move forward instead of falling in with the crowd and doing what everybody else did?
Bullheadedness. No, I thought that we, Sunday school folks, were not practicing what they preached on Sunday morning. That's hypocritical, and I thought that was wrong. And my mama thinks I just did it to make her mad, but I think I just did it because I thought it was the right thing to do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your work. So I am confused because I am an immigrant from Nigeria. Is your work in any way gender-based? Knowing that from the literature that I have read, that black men are mostly victims of prejudice.
Yes, and when it came to assaulting demonstrators, the white men were attacked first because they were traitors to the race. Then the black men were attacked. Then the black women. And Southern chivalry protected us white women demonstrators. But definitely, the men were attacked first, white and black. And overall in society, black men were seen as a threat to the whites because they were just interested in the white women. That was the only thing motivating them. You know, tell it to the black women. Got another one? Oh, no, someone else?
If you had some advice to give to Colin Kaepernick, what would that be?
Keep it up. When they opened the first state-sponsored civil rights museum in the United States, that was in Mississippi. We were talking about what are we going to do if that orange man walks out on the stage because the governor had invited him. Fortunately, he did. And a lot of us old folks, you know, veterans of the movement, said, well, let's take a knee. And then we thought, but can we get back up? So my boy here had the idea, just raise a fist and turn your back on. But that was good. But the man, he toured both museums in 20 minutes, right? And saw everything. Big news. And then he hightailed it out the back door and back to the airport. The Medgar Evers Airport.
So, Loki, what prompts you to go to all these schools and places and talk, and especially with your mother?
That's great, but you know, I get asked a lot, you know, would you have sat at the lunch counter? You know? You?
Maybe not.
Maybe not, yeah, you know, in all honesty, I don't think I would have. I'd like to think I would have, a lot of people do. I don't think I would. But my excuse is I don't have to because my mother already. Having said that, I have to do what I can, because doing nothing's not an option. So I've recognized the voice that I have, that I can, you know, take as a filmmaker, as the son of Joan Trumpauer, and be able to provide that opportunity in schools. That's really my motivation, is because I have to do something, right? And we all have to. You know, it's Janetta Williams is here this evening, president of NAACP, Salt Lake here. You know, she doesn't have to do that, right? I don't know how long you can do that. It's been forever, right? But she does, you know, because we all have to do something. No, we're not all going to be president. You know, we're not all going to be Joan, you know, but we don't have to. We just have to be us.
All you ladies aren't going to belong to Delta Sigma Theta.
Oh,
For you white folks, I'll explain it later.
You are good enough. You are exactly what we need. You are what your school needs and everything else. When I speak with kids, I say, don't try to change the world. Just change yours. Whatever that might be. For my mother, it was the South. For you, it just might be, you know, Salt Lake City. This could be your block, could be your school, could be whatever.
And I have one more question. So for both of you, if there was one quote, one memory you could leave with us today, what would it be?
You go first.
Gosh, the words is keep on keeping on. You know.
Don't you get weary.
Yeah. It's, you know, we talked about this last night. Brown versus Board was passed in '54. It took 10 years from that to have a civil rights bill. 10 years. Are you willing to be in the fight for 10 years? So, just see it through.
And remember the power of nonviolence. That famous picture with me getting sugar dumped on my head like I wasn't sweet enough. That one. The photographer, when he came in, he was about the same age as the demonstrators, 22. His name was Fred Blackwell. When he came in, he knew a bunch of the guys in the crowd behind us. He had graduated from the same high school, probably dated their older sisters, etc. One of them lived 3 doors down the street from him. When he came in, his sympathies were with his buddies. He got permission from the store manager to stand on the lunch counter to get pictures. Instead of looking down on us, he was there for 3 hours, watching his friends and watching the nonviolent demonstrators. When it was, by the time it was over, his sympathies had shifted from his gang to the demonstrators. That is the power of Gandhian nonviolence. So keep it nonviolent.
I have a question about your differing approaches to dialogue. Because I heard
what?
your differing approaches to dialogue. Because I heard Loki talk about you can't, in a way, I mean, you can't call someone stupid as your initial move. And I have heard you talk less about talk and more about nonviolent response that actually doesn't involve talk. I wonder if you could unpack for us, are there ways that you see your conceptions of dialogue about race either converging or diverging?
I think they're both necessary. Some situations don't lend themselves to speaking to each other, because other folks aren't interested in it, but they can see your actions. Other situations like this, talking is the way to go. I mean, I could be taking a knee, and you know that could send a message to some folks, but it wouldn't be really expanding on it here. So I think we got to do both.
Did you find that you had much of a role for, was there much of a role for talking in your experience during the civil rights movement? Or at that time was that just not?
We were more into direct action. But when something lent itself to speaking, we did that too.
Yeah, I just, you know, I really feel there's not enough communication taking place. And a lot, you know, social media makes it, and I don't want to pick on social media, it's a great vehicle, but there's a lot of people throwing stuff back and forth, you know, and we're waiting for that great retort that we can make, and, you know, how many likes that's going to get, and whatever else. And this, I love, you know, the social media activism. That doesn't really, it's a short-term satisfaction. This is what social media does anyways, right? What we need is, you know, long-term conversation. A willingness to actually sit down and listen. And that was the thing I was talking about with the Confederate flag races. But I had to actually, instead of just firing back, you know, some smart aleck response like I usually would, I'm good at that, yeah. I just sit there and just kind of hold back and just let that person, you know, walk them through it instead of attacking.
Conversation, maybe some politicians could learn
Well,
from you.
for sure, right, yeah. You know, and sometimes it's direct action for me. So this is my airport outfit. I travel a lot, and if you ever see photos of me when I'm like, you know, like, hey, something quick, you know, I'm at the airport, I'm going somewhere, this is what I wear. It's for a very distinct reason, because most of the people in the airport, in Salt Lake and elsewhere, look like me and don't like this shirt. And they look at me, and I look right back at them. Because I have an opportunity to advertise wherever I go, so I'm going to do it. You know, you do what you can when you can. Right? And yeah, people may get upset, by the way. Trust me, people get upset. You know, I've gotten people who emailed my employer, I should be fired because I was racist against police. I didn't know the police were a race. But nonetheless, I've been told I hate the white race. You know? I mean, but you know you're making a difference when someone's fighting back. You know? Just remember that. You know you're making a difference when people are fighting back.
So I'm kind of just going to ask you the same question I asked yesterday.
Oh, what was that?
I'm about to say it.
That was pretty late.
So what would you say to young people like me or younger, especially black boys, black girls? What can they do now to kind of get demonstrating, kind of get this way of life brought into our lives further than just being on Twitter, running a quick Twitter poll? Do you think racism happens? This side says yes. Do you think racism happens? This side says yes and no. I don't know. But what would you say we could do now?
The same thing that's always been done. You know, what Trump, sorry, I don't mean to curse, but what he's done, it works. It just works. There's things that just work. That red meat stuff that he does, that just works. Well, so does the stuff my mom does. There's certain things that are just tried and true, right? That's why they keep doing it. I think we've forgotten part of that.
We haven't got rid of slavery yet.
Right.
In the U.S. Constitution and Utah's, I would say get some demonstrations going down in support of the bills to remove slavery from your state constitution.
Hold people accountable. But you gotta just keep pressing and have that perseverance.
Old folks will help you make some signs.
You've got great mentors right in this room.
How do you think
we know
I
one
can
right
get
here,
more people?
Right? You know that, right? We got a great mentor right here.
That's true. How do you think I can get more people my age to kind of participate more?
Be the example. That consistent, persistent example. People are looking for leaders. You know, be the, you know, just be that voice. You know, when I did the film and these sort of things now, I mean, it was just a day in, day out, just constantly doing it and talking about it. And that's just what it is. I mean, the civil rights movement is day in, day out, just live and breathe it and just keep doing it. People will know that you're actually serious when they see how serious you are. Right? You know, yeah, that's a frustrating response, I know. If people ask me, well, what can I do, what can I do? And her response is always the same, no matter how young or how old you are. It's find a cause you're passionate about, get some friends together and go do it, do something about it. And it's like, yeah, but I mean, marketing campaigns, email, this, that, and this, you know, the tools are just the vehicles that get there. It's always been the exact same.
Line up your lawyer and contact the press and go do it.
Let's do 2 more questions.
Okay.
So this is actually a question for both of you. I don't mean to continue cussing, but in regards to Donald Trump, and especially in respects to the kind of, we'll call it machinations of white supremacy, why is fear so potent in the context of how white supremacy operates?
Because love is so potent and how it operates.
And I think there is so much fear because people have power and they're afraid of losing their power.
But remember, this has been ingrained forever. I mean, the slave revolts, right? I mean, going all the way back. That's what that's all about, you know? And guess what? They're coming for your women. Guess what? They're going to do this. Guess what? It's that constant feeding. I mean, this is a diet we've been fed on for years. What else is going to happen? Right? I mean, it's a natural thing that takes place at that point. That's why we got to re-establish what the real narrative is and break those down, and it's up to each of us. So I've been open.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll start and say.
Is it about Abraham Lincoln?
It is not.
Okay.
We can talk about that. So I want to say that as a critical race theory scholar, that I'm really grateful that you are 2 white people setting what I interpret as a positive example for other white people. And here in Utah, we are, overwhelmingly white. Much of our, not all, but a considerable portion of our overwhelmingly white population.
So we're not all crackers, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, right? And I said as a biracial black and white woman, right? So as a biracial black and white woman, and I've only been here for 3 years in Utah, but there's my interpretation an incredible amount of white indifference toward racism, and that's likely quite true of most of the United States and the global world, in so far as predominantly and traditionally white countries. But here is my question. So why should white people care about racism? I want you as white people to tell white people why they should care. Like, what's at stake for them?
What's at stake for them is their soul. And if we are all created in the image of the Almighty, and I disrespect you, or you because you're bald, whatever, or you, I am disrespecting the Almighty. And I think our souls are in danger if we are racist and indifferent.
I was say bald is beautiful, Mom.
God with you.
What's it? Why should we care?
Yeah, right. For you, white men in particular. We got all kinds of white men who don't give a shit.
Right.
Or squat, or whatever.
Yeah.
Not a word I haven't used.
But the shocking thing is, there's a lot of people of all backgrounds who don't care.
Right.
They're just living their lives. They do care to an extent, but they're just living their lives, right?
And some of them look like me.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm afforded an opportunity to be able to do this, right? Not just because I'm, a white male, I put the effort in, but my family's one little bit of privilege, right? I have the education, everything else. I've got a job that allows me to do this, right? I took advantage of the opportunity to do what I do. But a lot of people are just trying to live day by day, right? Paycheck to paycheck. They care, but they can't do anything about it. But
Well, they think they can't do anything.
they think they can't do anything about it, and I don't want to make excuses for people, white fragility and everything else, and those sort of things. But I like my mom said that. It's about who you are. It's if we truly believe in what we believe as a nation, and in our fundamental religious beliefs, then we should care about no matter their gender, their orientation, their color, doesn't matter, economic status. And the world is changing. This country's getting browner, right? And to have a place in that, you gotta cross that divide if you're willing to do something. Because your kids are gonna suffer. Isolating our children into these white little enclaves and so forth, they're not gonna be able to function in the rest of the world. Economically speaking, they're screwed. Bob talked about this is what's coming.
Yes.
Well, it's not an easy answer. I'm sorry. Sometimes we get a question we don't know how to answer. That's a beautiful question.
Well,
I think about that more.
contextually, right, and I ask you because people of color can advocate for white people to care, but other white people can't hear us in the same way they can hear you.
Sure.
And so for you to tell white people why white people should care, it does the same thing that your shirt does. Like I wear that shirt in the airport, I get mean mugged.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right? But it's mean mugged in a different way than how you get mean mugged. Yeah.
Right. I can't speak for all white people.
No?
But yeah, I do what I can do, because I'm driven by my convictions to do so. And that's why we should do it. We all know what's right and wrong. And I think deep in our hearts we know what those are. Taking that leap and being willing to say what we know is right and to do what is right, regardless of the consequences.
Let's let this man in.
I'm sorry.
Well, no, I just found it very interesting what you said about our kids suffering today. Okay, I've been a foster parent here in the Salt Lake Valley for 26 years, and I've raised a lot of African-American young men. Today was really interesting for me because it really struck home for me, because I had a young man who was, extremely, very quiet young man, but was tormented by two Caucasian boys at school today. He was called the nigger, chased him down the hall, tried to fight him, and the school kind of painted over it. Didn't tell me that that was part of the conversation until I asked him to explain his side of the story. But he was suspended because he turned around and defended himself for being called the name. So I still believe that we still have, I think it's becoming more apparent more and more today. It's almost like at one point in time we saw it kind of die down, but I think it's getting stronger and stronger. Because I'm seeing it in our young people and what they're having to suffer today through it, and how there's this, it's almost like back in the 70s, it was really, people were in an uproar over rated R movies, but today it's like, not a big deal, rated R movie. And it's now, it's kind of putting this coating over it for our young people today. And I think that I'm really vocal about it. I mean, I threw a fit, and I was not happy about it. And I think that that's one of the things is when that happens, we have to be willing to stand up for it. And I think sometimes it gets really scary to stand up. But I'm not going to stand by and watch our young people be persecuted just because of the color of their skin. So, I mean, I think it's amazing what you did and what you did, man, at that time. And I think it makes a big statement. I can't wait to go home and show these boys what you've done.
And what we did is one thing. The big thing is, what are y'all gonna do?
Last question. Promise, last one.
But you can talk to us after a little bit.
I am Danette, or otherwise known as Nabo, and I was wondering about your presentation and some of the things that you have talked about, and wondering about the inclusion of Native peoples in what you're doing, because racism does happen to us, and in the same, not in the same context, but in the Constitution, the United States Constitution, we're still referenced as savage in there. And then the Land Allotment Acts had huge consequences for us. And then also, I think when you had that timeline where you said there was the good history, that was actually the height of, I think, our bad history when the policy of termination was going on. I'm just wondering, well, not really wondering, I'm hoping that you can probably speak to Native populations, Native nations in future projects.
And I appreciate that. I truly do. It's actually, I get asked that a lot in regards to, well, how can you only talk about, black and white and sort of things. It's my wheelhouse. It's what I know the most in that respects. But my goal is to, because I didn't talk about anything that took place with, with immigration and so forth. But my goal is to actually be able to start weaving those things in. I was actually just talking to a filmmaker 2 nights ago about what's taking place in Bears Ears and so forth, and doing, can we get together and do a film about what's going on with that, to expand on that dialogue. Usually when I bring up the 270 million acres, I'm like, where do you think we got that from? The Homestead Act.
Now.
And so, yes. Yeah.
To take it back
I
to the
love that.
Civil
I
War
appreciate that.
and the flag and all those famous Yankee generals, Sherman, Custer, whole bunch of them. once they got through killing Southerners, they went out and started killing Indians. That gets overlooked. Sheridan, the Indian Wars, or the wars against the Indians, were led by the same generals that led the Union troops in the Civil War. They were just crazy men out to kill folks. And they took care of us Southerners, and y'all were next in line. That gets totally overlooked in history, and I think that's a good connecting point for talking about the plight of Native people.
This is a great example of being able to, have this dialogue, raise a voice and raise a point, and create an observation that obviously I wasn't making in this. Not that because I don't think about it. That's not a passion of mine, but that I can make more of those connections within that. And so I thank you for that, but the willingness to be able to speak up and say, hey, you know what, wait a second, this presentation is not perfect, trust me, but there's more to add to it, and I want to layer that into it. I appreciate that. That's what we need to do, be willing to have that. So,
I think our leaders want to have us hush.
Just the last question. I'm setting them up. Why should this group see your videos, the 2 videos you released?
Oh yeah, that's good stuff. 3 videos. Forget technical, I have 3 videos out. Matter of fact, thank you very much. The videos were created, the documentaries were created to create dialogue. Right? To try to find different ways for people to approach this subject. Some people, my mom's picture makes white people feel really good about themselves. They go, wow, man, look, we did something. That's a fact. Jerry Mitchell, Jerry Mitchell, of course, investigative reporter, he said, the great thing about your mom's photo is that she's white. Because when you talk about the civil rights movement, oh, well, that's a black thing. And it's like, wait a second, white people were involved?
Native American people too?
Yeah, John Salton, right? It's like, well, wait a second. This opens the dialogue more, and seeing the experience that's there. The uncomfortable truth is another way of kind of that entry point. Black, White, and Us was about transracial adoptions in Utah. Racism through the lens of transracial adoptions that just came up. Is another avenue for that. It's a way for us to be able to think and to share. The original title of The Uncomfortable Truth was Why You Are Racist and Didn't Even Know It. And I felt, the audience that really needs to see this probably isn't going to appreciate that. It's a little too confrontational, let me dial this back. And the original idea was just attack, right? And then as I started studying my family history and so forth, I realized that the story I need to tell, I need to point the fingers back at myself. So that disarms people, right? They're not feeling attacked. And then layering Luvon in that story is because my mom was the first white person Luvon could ever trust, right? Actually, a white woman, let me phrase that, because he grew up in the Delta when Emmett Till was killed. I had a person who watched the film, early version of it. He watched it, and about 20 minutes into it, he goes, I don't know, man, I don't know. And this is a white guy who went to an HBCU, right? And he's like, I don't know, that Levant, man, I said, oh, he's angry and black, right? He goes, yeah, I'm not feeling comfortable about this. I'm like, wow, okay. I said, keep watching. At the end of the film, he's like, oh my gosh, I love this guy. Because he was willing to take the journey with Luvon. He says, a good thing you're in there, because man, otherwise, if you weren't in that film, I don't think anyone would watch this thing. Because it's an angry black guy.
That Luvon and Loki are saying almost verbatim the same thing in many parts of the film. The white folks just say an angry black man. But you're reasonable.
So, to continue the plug, we do have a few copies of the films here. If you want to, I don't know if can they buy it, or do you guys have to call it a donation and then they get copies? Okay. Yeah, so there are copies available to the, of the films, some books. My mom will sign them if you want, those sort of things. Black, White, and Us is this latest documentary we have. We actually do have a screening. It's going to be taking place at the LDS Film Festival, March 2nd, which is a Saturday at 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon. Hopefully, some of y'all can make it down there. LDS Film Festival is not directly associated with the LDS Church. Obviously there's a key focus that they have at that festival. But they felt the film, even though I said a few things about Brigham Young that they, kind of were uncomfortable with, they felt the film was important enough to have in their festival because they wanted to have a dialogue, right? And the film is focused on racism through the lens of transracial adoptions in Utah. These are white people who adopt black children and suddenly realize racism is real.
And we only got 15 more minutes than we got.
Oh, for the show up the lights? So, thank you. There we go, I'm done.